July 30th, 1975. A hot Detroit summer afternoon. Jimmy Hoffa, the former Teamsters union boss, stood outside a suburban restaurant, reportedly heading to a meeting with underworld figures. Witnesses said he was calm, polite, carrying nothing more than a briefcase. He was last seen speaking to a man in a dark suit, exchanging handshakes and nods as though discussing mundane business. By the evening, Hoffa had vanished. No signs of a struggle. No calls from kidnappers. The car he drove remained parked, untouched, and Hoffa himself disappeared into the shadows of one of the most organized and dangerous criminal networks America had ever known. His disappearance would become a national obsession, a case studied in law enforcement circles, and obsessively speculated upon by journalists, historians, and true crime aficionados. For decades, Hoffa's vanishing was not just the loss of a man, it symbolized the collision between labor, organized crime, and federal power. He was a figure both revered and feared, and his sudden absence sent ripples through unions, mob families, and government agencies alike. To understand the full scope, we must examine Hoffa's rise. Born in 1913 in Indiana, Hoffa became a labor organizer at an early age. His charisma, tactical mind, and sheer ruthlessness allowed him to climb the ranks, eventually becoming president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. By the 1960s, he wielded immense influence, controlling pensions, union contracts, and a web of Alisand adversaries that stretched from Detroit to New York, Chicago to Las Vegas. Yet Hoffa's power made him both indispensable and dangerous. He was deeply enmeshed with organized crime figures, relying on mob muscle to enforce strikes, intimidate competitors, and secure union funds. Federal authorities were increasingly aware of his ties. Multiple indictments, investigations, and prison sentences punctuated his career. Hoffa emerged as a man both inside the law and just outside it, balancing influence and intimidation like a high-wire act. The mafia saw Hoffa as a useful tool and a potential threat. He had allies, enemies, and secrets that made him vulnerable. Even minor disputes over union control could escalate to violence, and Hoffa's attempts to reclaim leadership positions in the Teamsters only heightened tensions in 1975. The day Hoffa disappeared was unremarkable to an outsider. Suburban diners, crowded streets, and the summer heat painted a mundane picture. But Hoffa's meeting was no casual lunch. According to investigative accounts, he intended to meet with figures connected to both New Jersey and Detroit crime families. He hoped to negotiate a return to union leadership, but at a time when certain mob factions feared his resurgence. Witnesses reported seeing Hoffa enter the restaurant at approximately 2:30 p.m. Others said he left moments later, though accounts conflict. A man in a dark suit was reportedly present, details sparse. Descriptions varying but enough to suggest the meeting was prearranged, not spontaneous. Hoffa never emerged to complete his errands, never called home, and never returned to his office. Within hours, his family and colleagues realized he was missing. The initial investigation was chaotic. The Detroit FBI office coordinated with local police, tracing Hoffa's last movements, interviewing staff, diners, and nearby residents. Surveillance was minimal by modern standards. Phones rang unanswered. Federal authorities quickly suspected foul play, and the FBI's infamous Hoffa task force began compiling interviews, sightings, and tips. Speculation immediately linked Hoffa's disappearance to organized crime. Hoffa had recently announced intentions to reclaim leadership of the Teamsters, threatening mob influence over union funds. Multiple families had motives: financial control, elimination of a potential adversary, and preemptive strikes against a man who knew too much. As days turned into weeks, theories multiplied. Some suggested Hoffa was murdered immediately, his body disposed of in an untraceable location. Others posited he was buried in a concrete foundation, dumped into rivers, or interred in a mob-owned junkyard. Decades of tips would later suggest locations as far-flung as Michigan forests, suburban homes, and industrial facilities. Yet, no conclusive evidence emerged. Witnesses who came forward often recanted, disappeared, or were deemed unreliable. Confessions made years later by imprisoned mob figures offered tantalizing details, but little verifiable proof. Investigators faced a maze of conflicting information, with some leads likely fabricated to protect criminal networks. Over time, Hoffa's disappearance became a symbol and narrative about the reach and secrecy of organized crime in mid-20th century America. Analysts debated the most likely culprits. The Genovese, Gambino, and Detroit families all had intersecting motives. Some theories suggested an internal Teamsters betrayal. Others implicated federal complicity or corruption that facilitated the cover-up. Several recovered accounts described late-night meetings, unmarked vehicles, and coded conversations indicating Hoffa's plans were known in advance. Key mob figures at the time allegedly met to discuss solutions to Hoffa's ambitions. Yet, direct proof connecting any individual to the act of murder or disposal remained elusive. Investigators identified multiple high-probability scenarios. Immediate mob execution. Hoffa was killed on the spot in the restaurant or nearby, and the body was transported to a pre-prepared disposal site. Staged vanishing. Hoffa may have been abducted and concealed temporarily to negotiate power, though this is less supported by evidence. Inter-family retaliation. Rival mob factions may have conspired to remove Hoffa permanently to prevent destabilization or loss of control over union funds. Inside job. Certain Teamsters, aides, or associates could have facilitated the disappearance, leveraging inside knowledge to ensure Hoffa's inability to reclaim leadership. Each theory has supporting evidence and glaring gaps, contributing to decades of speculation. Today, Jimmy Hoffa's fate remains officially unsolved. Over 40 years later, the FBI officially closed its missing person investigation in 1982 after concluding the case was cold but the mystery remains in public imagination. Hoffa's disappearance shaped union politics, influenced mob behavior, and became a cultural touchstone for narratives of corruption, secrecy, and the American underworld. His name evokes both admiration for his labor achievements and fascination with the unknown circumstances of his vanishing. Empty chairs at union meetings, unanswered questions, and speculative confessions continue to remind us that some secrets are guarded not by law, but by fear and silence. Jimmy Hoffa may have walked into a restaurant that summer day, but he stepped into legend when he disappeared and the world has yet to see him again.